for listening and or watching Expanding the Zone once again this week. I'd like to welcome you in, however you may be listening out on your podcast app or maybe listening and watching here on our YouTube channel. And joined by my brother Matt, as I always am. And Matt, I want to jump right into it this week. Show 43. We're talking change this week here on our leadership podcast. And as always, want to thank Dr. Chris Good, Good Health Chiropractic Center does a lot of support on our YouTube channel, which he allows us some flexibility to do a lot of different things like this, plus get out and cover some of our local athletes, which I'll be doing as we get into August and high school sports return. But, Matt, we had some great feedback on show 42 where we talked about getting and maintaining great people in the line of leadership. And this week, as we always do, we kind of keep our eyes and ears out there on things in the sports world or things in the leadership world. And change is everywhere, it seems like, right? Obviously, the big news: USC, UCLA, the expansion of the Big Ten. I think the SEC was already out in front of them. I know you talked Live Golf last week on the show a little bit in a reference, and I think it's a good time of year as we get ready for here next month a new sports year in terms of high school sports, college sports. New school year in terms of administrators, educators, and students across the board. So I guess I'll jump right into it. Maybe just give us an opening thought on change, and then I'll kind of get us going here.
Yeah, we always try to look at what's going on in the world of sports, and it just seems to me like there's more change going on right now than there seems to have been in a long time. Major change, like you talked about with college football. The professional golf tours, just a lot of stuff going on. It seems like adjustments being made, changes being made, and like you said, it really got us thinking about some of the things we've seen over the years in high school sports. We're all the way down to youth sports, really, but we focus a lot on high school sports. Things we've seen, changes for the good, maybe changes that were ill-advised and ended up not lasting very long. We've seen both sides of it, and then also got us thinking about what maybe changes that we need to see coming down the pike here.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was kind of looking at a quote here in preparation of the show from John C. Maxwell's talking about change is inevitable, growth is optional, and I guess that's my first question for you. Sometimes I'm not the most comfortable with change. I'm probably someone who's a little bit more hang in there, figure it out, make it work, maybe loyal to a fault. I don't know. I don't know if those things are good or bad. I guess that's what we're going to talk about over the next 40 minutes to an hour here. But I guess when I say change is inevitable, growth is optional to you, is change a must in terms of being successful? Just talk to me more about change from the point of leadership as we get into this week.
Well, I don't think there's any question. I mean, we've talked so much of this show that we do, Shayne, crosses over to some of our previous shows and things like that. But we've talked in some of our other episodes, whatever topic we're on. I can remember one we talked about with coaching about how if you're not willing to evolve and change as a coach, and we've seen this, it gets to a point where you can no longer do it really at no matter how successful you've been. You've seen it. You've seen those guys who had Hall of Fame careers, but late in their careers, they got a little stubborn. They got a little, I'm not doing this. I'm not willing to change. And eventually, they had to get out. Right. And the coaches that were able to stand the test of time and really last are those ones that are willing to evolve and change, because times are different, whether we like it or not. Some things we like, some things we don't, I'm sure. There's things about the good old days that were good, right? And there's things about the good old days that we're probably glad we don't have anymore. But regardless, yeah, things are changing, and as a leader, as a coach, as an administrator, whatever your role is, a teacher, if you're not willing to adjust and adapt, yeah, I mean, you're going to have a hard time.
And as I was listening to you talk, a lot of times it's not even the willingness to change an X's and O, or a way you teach something or different things like that. A lot of times it's culture pieces. A lot of time it's adjusting to people and relationships and communication and social media and all those different things that play such a factor in the things that go far beyond a practice or a game plan or a film session. Um, yeah, it is. Yeah, a lot of times we'll have those sayings of, just because we used to do it different doesn't mean we did it wrong. And
Right.
sometimes we can get stuck on some of those things. I even joked on a previous show where I said we used to go outside to use the bathroom, then we thought indoor plumbing was kind of cool. You know what I mean? And I guess when I think of getting outside the comfort zone to get better, I'm in the middle of something right now that's arguably my favorite time of year. June kind of ends some of the basketball play, and July set aside in our basketball program for individual workouts. And I'll spend hours in the gym and the one-on-one setting, and you know, and I love just going to work on some specific details for that particular kid. And I talk to them a lot about how you're going to have to get uncomfortable to get better. And sometimes it's hard to practice what you preach, right? I mean, because
Right.
like I might be talking to them about using the left hand, or if I'm trying to correct a kid's swing. You always have that kid at baseball that says, "Coach, I can't hit that way," and you're like, "Son, your batting average starts with a one. You can't hit the way you hit." You know what I mean? Like you might
Right.
want to try
Right.
this way.
Right.
Um, you were talking about some frustration in your golf swing today, right? It's
Right.
you know to you have to figure out, you're going to have to go do something a little uncomfortable to get out of that funk, and to straighten that driver out a little bit. So I guess my point is, how do you model, and then do you try to encourage the people you work with to break outside that comfort zone, in order to be a little bit more willing to accept change? Because that's something I was wanting to go with here in the agenda moving forward, is accepting change. What's your go-to in terms of your sell job when you're trying to work with someone of any age, in terms of trying to get them a little bit more open-minded to being uncomfortable to accomplish that change?
Well, I think as a leader, and I don't know how you feel about this, Shane, but I think as a leader, um, the people, kids, if you're a coach, or people that work with you, if you're a professional, um, they see they see through change just for the sake of change. I think that's the first thing, like, you have to avoid, because if you have a reputation as a leader or a coach of just changing every time you turn around, or every time something doesn't work, oh, we automatically have to just change everything. You get a reputation for that. You see what I'm saying? And now all of a sudden it's like as a coach, if you're talking about your individual workouts, if you go in there and you're working with a young lady on her um, first step, trying to get explosion off the first step, getting an angle, going to the rim. And let's say it's not, that may not be the best example, but it's not going well for her. She's not doing it right. And then the next day you come in there, it's like, well, let's try something different. And then the next day you come in there, let's try something different. I think people see, and let's be real honest. We've been in education a long time. How many new ideas has come down the pike from state legislators, or
Mhm.
people, oh, we're going to do this now, we're going to do this. And as well as I do, usually you get kind of the eye roll right at the first staff meeting when there's something new being. And why is that? Well, because you know, maybe we haven't stuck with things long enough, and it's just, well, let's just change it again. And I think sometimes, you feel like you're just throwing darts and hoping something sticks, right? Um, but I think so. So to answer your question, I think the first thing is develop a reputation of, hey, I don't just change for the sake of change. Anything we ask you to do, it's been really well thought out, and something that we think is really, really crucial to our success. I used this example on another show one time, but I can remember one year when I was coaching in Vinton County years ago, we had sort of made a commitment in the off season that we were going to press. We were going to play 10, 11 guys. We were going to pick up full court. We were going to press. And we really thought that's what we wanted to do. And all of a sudden we got 5 games I think 5 games into the year, or about 7 games into the year. I'm sorry, and we're 4-3. We've struggled a little bit. We've already lost 2 league games, and as we started watching film, we realized, we're not playing half court defense at all because we're just trying to steal everything, press full court. We're not really committing to defense in the half court, and we made a decision, which I don't like to do, of a major change midseason. Right. We said, look, we were fortunate. We were right around Christmas break. We had like a week of practice without games. And we basically said, hey, listen, we can't do this. This isn't working for us, and we're going to have to do it differently. We're going to have to play more in the half court defensively. We're going to have to really commit to it. It might only mean we're playing 8 or 9 guys instead of 11 guys. See, that was a hard thing too, a pill to swallow for some kids, I'm sure. But because we had a reputation of, hey, we don't just change, with the wind. I mean, this is something we've put a lot of thought into. The kids bought in. We ended up winning 13, 14 straight games, and it turned everything around. But that's my point, is like, change has to be well thought out. It always amazes me, Shayne, and you see it all the time, even like in coaching, right? Well, we need a change in volleyball coach. We need a change in our baseball coach. And my question to people always is, who do you think? Who's in line? Because if we're going to get rid of somebody, you see what I'm saying? If you're going to make a change,
people always ready to tell you what's wrong, but they don't have a solution.
Exactly. So-and-so needs to play more. Okay, well, who does he play for? Who needs to come off the floor more? You see what I'm saying? Like, there's always, and I think change has to be well thought out, I guess, or intentional might be the right word, Shayne.
Well, I love the well thought. There's 2 words that came into my mind when you were talking there: ego and results. I mean, part of what you're talking about, and you probably had the confidence within your coaching career to not have an ego involved. There's a saying in my office. I always try to remind myself. You've heard me say it on the show before. I'm never trying to be right. I'm trying to get it right. I mean, it's one of those things I really want to figure it out. And sometimes you got to put your ego aside. But do you think results put the pressure of success, particularly on young leaders? It's like I'm watching the Reds game last night, and their young catcher's up in a late game situation. He lays down an outstanding bunt and moves the guys over. Well, one of the best Reds hitters come up the very next batter, and he hits a fly ball up to the first baseman. They don't score. So you can imagine the analytic people just going nuts. Why are we bunting? Is that a poor decision, or should Jonathan India drive a run in? What I'm saying? Like, if he's a franchise type of player here, should he step up in that 8th inning spot and knock a run in? So it's one of those things in terms of the results. Does that make it a bad decision to bunt because it didn't work? And I think that's a little bit what you're talking. Don't you think ego and results and the pressure, particularly on young leaders, that sometimes can really put a little pressure on you? Man, is this the right move, or should I do this? What would be the perception of? Another thing in my notes is, think about that GM that gets hired in. Man, this isn't my head coach. This isn't my quarterback, or I didn't draft this guy. Man, if we win a little bit with them, am I going to really get credit, or do I need to start over? If I'm going to put my name on it, I want my people. You see what I'm saying? Like, don't you think sometimes the results, the perception, where the ego comes into play, can really impact those things?
I don't think there's any question, because we all have to make decisions, and then if like you say, if the result works out, then it was the greatest decision ever, right? I mean, and if it doesn't, then it was a terrible decision. And it's just, you can't, to me as a leader, I don't know how you can live in that lane, because we talk about process, but it really comes into play here. I mean, you have to have a process, and it can't always be driven only by results. And you know how I feel about process. I think some people use it as a cop-out. I've said it before. I'm not the type of guy that just says, it's okay to go 0-20 and 0-22 in a basketball season as long as you're sticking with the process. Well, the process has to garner some level of result, okay? But what I'm saying is, you can't base every single decision you make, only you can't. Let me rephrase that. You can't evaluate every decision you make based only on the result every time, because sometimes it's just like you say, the execution of it. Sometimes as a leader, you might have a plan. Like as a principal, Shayne, you may have a plan for your teachers in their classroom, Well, why does it work for some and not others? Well, it could be execution. Some teachers may execute that better than others, right? So I think you have to have honest evaluation of your own plan and be critical of it, but at the same time be fair to yourself. Be fair and understand that results are going to vary sometimes based on the execution of that plan.
In sports, a lot of times, and business in general, and maybe even all the way down to high school and education, you can't have these talks, and you can't really talk about very many things in decision making without money coming up. Let's just be honest, right? It's a driving force. And one of the biggest sports stories that had come out earlier today was the Baker Mayfield going to Carolina. That was announced this afternoon, and I heard someone say, look, I'm going to follow the money. Sam Darnold is making 18 million this year. Baker Mayfield's going to make 15, but the Browns are picking up 10 million. So Carolina's only responsible for 5 million. If you're paying a guy 18 million and another guy 5, the 18 million guy's your starting quarterback coming into camp. And now, look, I can sit here and tell you, I care less who plays quarterback for the Carolina Panthers this year, but the competitor in me and the coach in me thought, wow, could you imagine coaching at a level where someone walks into the Vinton County gym and tells you, hey, so-and-so is going to have to play point guard because of this, and this, even if this other guy might be better. You see what I'm saying? Like
Right.
When you get into factors of outside things that influence your decisions, what level of frustration does that have? What advice can you give to a leader to still work through that and still have their vision and still try to implement their vision, even though they may have people over top of them, or in this case, an analytic or a dollar sign or whatever, putting pressure on them to kind of go a certain direction in terms of their decisions?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. It's a tough question because in some of those cases, the people over top of you are your superiors or your boss, right? And so you have to respect that. You can't. Let's face it. I mean, we can sit here and act like you be your own guy and all that, but I mean, you can't be a complete renegade either. I mean, you're everybody's for the most part working for somebody, right? I mean, that's kind of the way it works, but I think sometimes, like in coaching or in some of those situations where you are taxed with making that decision, I just think, again, it comes down to that preparation of just being confident within it, saying, look, I'm not going to make decisions based on just a whim. The decisions I make are going to be based on, we used to talk to parents and even kids about playing time, right? Because that's always something that's going to be controversial. As a high school coach, most parents think their kids should play more. Most kids want to play more. I get it, but the one thing we always said was, look, we put a lot, and this is the truth too. We put a lot of time and effort into how many minutes a kid should play, who should start. That's not just something that we just sort of drew out of a hat. I mean, we really looked at film and say, hey, this kid's getting 9 minutes a game. He needs 11 or he needs 7, depending on what's going on. And we put a lot of time and effort into that. But I think outside pressure, does affect decisions. Like, I'll give you one. We talked about this, Shayne, a couple weeks ago, maybe in one of our shows, but you remember here recently, the OHSA had several referendums that had to be voted on. They basically, any changes to the bylaws, excuse me, have to be voted on by member schools. So, however many member schools there are in the whole state of Ohio, has to vote on these things. Well, the controversial one, the one that was caused quite a stir, was the NIL for high school, right? The name, image, and likeness. Well, immediately when that came out, and this is a whole other angle we could talk about, right? Because some of this pressure nowadays is not just from within, but social media and everything from the outside coming down on you too. But people were losing their mind about the NIL. I can't believe the OHSAA is wanting to do this and that, and look, I'm going to talk about some things later in this show that I think the OHSAA needs to do better. Okay. But in this situation, I understood what they were doing. Okay. I understood what they were doing. I went to my principal, I'll be honest with you, and I said, look, because you're going to vote on this. And he wanted to know what I thought. And I went through the referendums with him. And I said, and I honestly don't know how he ended up voting. I said, I could go either way on this. I said, because the OHSA is not in favor of name, image, and likeness. That's not what they're doing here.
Right.
What they're trying to do is to be proactive for once, because they're typically reactive, proactive and get out in front of this because they think that they're going to lose a court case somewhere along the line where a kid wants to do it and the court's going to say he can do it. And do we want to be like the NCAA? We talked about change tonight. What's happening to the NCAA right now, right? I mean, it's basically blowing up as we know it. You're looking at, what are we going to have, 2 conferences eventually, and that's it. And people, I read the other day where Miami of Florida got a quarterback and they told him they were going to give him $9.5 million. And his agent now said this, and this is actually a violation, but this guy said it anyway, said he lost money choosing Miami over the University of Florida. Florida was actually going to give him 11 million, but he really wanted to be a Hurricane. Okay. So, I mean, this is where we're at, right? With name, image, and likeness. And I think the OHSA thinks, hey, listen, do we want the wild, wild west here? Or do we want to be out ahead of this possibly if this thing comes down the pike, right? But what happened was the outside pressure was so bad. I mean, I don't know if you remember getting on social media and people just act like the world was coming to an end. And I don't think they really understood what the OHSA was trying to do. So I think that's a little bit what you're talking about, isn't it, Shayne, where you've got to stand in the face sometimes of opposition when you're in a leadership position for what you believe is the right thing to do. And that's easy to sit here on a podcast talk about, right? A lot harder to actually do.
Well, it is, and you're exactly right when you say, there's a challenge or a risk that comes with change. Let's face it. I mean, when I said in the opening, sometimes I struggle with that. I'm a good communicator. I can usually be very open-minded to a lot of different perspectives, a lot of different viewpoints. But in my personal life, when I think of my job, I've worked one place pretty much my entire adult life. I worked in one job for about 20 years. I just changed over a year ago to a job. Lived in the same home. Um, Bethany and I've been married 18 years. A car. I mean, I'm one that could I go get a new car? Yeah, I probably could. Yeah, I mean, like, do I kind of like just owning my car and I'll drive it, and as long as it stays somewhat yeah, that kind of like not having a car payment. I mean, it's one of those things where if if I would challenge myself a little bit, and I have professionally here with some of these new challenges, but like could I take some risks? Should I take some challenges? Maybe enjoy a nice car, maybe enjoy some different things. Yeah, maybe, but there's also some different things that come with that. You see what I'm saying? So
Right.
like I think when you're trying to roll these things out, like here's something that comes to my mind. I heard someone talking today on UCLA, USC coming to Big Ten, and it talked about tradition, and you're ruining tradition. You're doing this, and this, and someone got talking about Ohio State and Penn State. This came up,
Right.
and I guess I never thought about it because, again, at my age, I've never really known a whole lot other than Penn State in the Big Ten, right? They
Right.
joined back like when we were in high school, if I'm not mistaken, or something like that. So like, but if you go back, Ohio State and Penn State, they never even played hardly from the beginning of time. They played like 7 or 8 times, and the first 100 years of college football. I don't even think they played from 1980 until they joined the Big Ten. Think about it now, man. Ohio State, Penn State every year is must watch.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And the argument they were making today was, you don't think USC at Wisconsin on a Saturday night, or USC Michigan, or Ohio State going out to UCLA, or things like that aren't going to become must watch, make new traditions. So
Right.
so I guess my point is, it is okay to appreciate old traditions, but don't be afraid of the risk and the challenge of making the new tradition. Now, I want to talk to you about the perspective of the follower, not just in leadership. Sometimes the follower, in my opinion, sabotages change. And I think that's a really risky, scary thing as a leader when you don't have buy-in from the people you're trying to get on board. I see people oftentimes when they don't like something, they don't give it their all. One of the greatest public speakers I'd heard in terms of professional development was a guy named Todd Whitaker. He talked about people, not programs, and he talked about programs. They sound great, and the bylaws are on paper, right? And in terms of the layout, but it's truly people that take them out into the world and make them work or make them not work. And I think there's a lot of value in that. Can you think of times where, like I always think of you taking like your younger son out, trying to teach him something, right? If he's mad at you, he's not even going to try on that next swing at the
Right.
golf club or the
Right.
baseball bat. I'll show dad it didn't work. See, dad, it didn't work. Like you're sabotaging the change and almost not even giving it a chance to see if it works or not. Have you other than with your son, have you come across that? And again, what are some of the challenges in terms of where you give in as a leader or where you have to reevaluate or where you have to change? Because let's face it, again, at the end of the day, if people aren't on, if your players don't believe in it as a coach, if your teachers don't believe in it as a parent, you're having a hard time being successful. So you really are in that rock and a hard place.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you get that sometimes where when a, especially when that change is a little bit of a controversial one, or it's just something, really, really new to a person who, maybe further along in their career and they're not ready to learn new tricks. Like, do you remember when you know, things really started to become computerized and, you know, uh, I mean, I can remember the old school teachers that were close to retirement. I'm not messing with this email thing. You know what I mean? I'm not, and I'm not, and everything, I can remember when, when I took over as athletic director, we had a lady, God rest her soul, was a wonderful, wonderful lady who had been our athletic secretary for 40 some years. But you know what? She was going to do handwritten. It wasn't going to be a computerized contract. I'm going to write these things out. We're going to mail them out. And she was set in her ways, and I'm not, in her case, she wasn't trying to sabotage change. It was just an uncomfortable situation for her, and she didn't want to change it. So you get a little bit of that, but I think in some cases you do get people who, I don't know, maybe just they don't support their leader to the point where, hey, if I can make this thing look bad, it makes the leader look bad. But let's be real honest. If you're in that situation, um, you're probably doomed for failure anyway, because you've got some serious, um, culture issues. But I do think sometimes though, you'll get a little bit, even if there's a disagreement. Well, like I'll just give you an example. I'll just say this. A few years back in our Southeast district, after years and years of coaches pushing for it, we got the super sectional, right? And for people that don't know what that is, I don't want to get off on a tangent, but I'm going to make this like a Cliff Notes version. Instead of, when you vote for a sectional seeding, you vote district wide. So if there's 18 Division II teams, you seed them 1 through 18. It used to be divided up geographically, like 9 teams would be here, 9 teams would be there, right? So you vote all 18. We pushed for this for years. And the reason is because we felt like it was the fairest way, rather than, sometimes you'd have a sectional that was completely loaded and one that was weak. This way, everybody's in the same pot. But as you know, Shayne, as a baseball coach, and I know as a basketball coach, you see the problem is they didn't go all the way in. They some of the people on the Southeast District Board didn't really want to do it. They finally sort of gave into it. But instead of going all the way with it, they left some pieces out, which now some of those holes are showing up at times. But it's not that the original idea was the problem. It was that we didn't go all the way with it. We took part of the original idea, right? Well, let's take this piece, but not this piece. And do I think those people purposely sabotaged it? No, I'm not saying that, but I don't think some of the guys that were pretty stubbornly against it, I don't think it hurts their feelings when we have problems with it, if that makes sense, because I think in some ways that they feel like, that sort of justifies their point of view.
Well, it's almost like the leadership sabotaged it there in a way. You know what I mean? Like, I
Right.
talked about it's almost like, well, we'll try this since they're asking for it, and we'll show them it doesn't work.
Yeah,
You know what
right.
I mean?
No, exactly. That's kind of what I was trying to say right there. It's almost like, you see that sometimes too. I can remember talking to a coach one time who said, I'm playing all these seniors and they're just getting their teeth kicked in. And he said, I'm playing all these seniors so that after about 4 games, they'll realize how bad they are. So when I bench them, they can't complain, right? And I'm thinking to myself, okay, well, but you're allowing your team to get killed because you don't want to step up as a leader and just make a call, right? You want to you want to prove it somehow, take some heat off yourself instead of just maybe stepping forward and making that decision. So yeah, I can see that, I can see both sides of that. And let's face it, Shayne, as with certain sports over the years, we've seen changes, right? We've seen changes come in. We've seen pressure to make changes that haven't come in. Like in basketball, we still don't have a shot clock yet, although that could be on the horizon. I think starting in, if I'm not mistaken, maybe starting in the winter of 23, right? So that would be not this basketball season, but next, if I understand it correctly, and I have to look back. The individual states can adopt the shot clock according to the National Federation. So we might be on the verge of that. But how long has that discussion been going on, right? There's been a lot of people wanting it, a lot of people don't, a lot of pressure on it. Years ago, rally scoring came into play in volleyball. You could argue that may have been one of the greatest. I mean, I would argue it's one of the greatest rule changes ever in high school sports. I mean, let's just be real honest. I don't know how watchable volleyball was with the side out thing back in the day, right? And I'll even talk to ladies who played in that era. And they're like, oh gosh, we'd have loved to have had rally scoring. You know what I mean? And so you have some rule changes that are just great, but then, maybe you've had some other things. I don't know. I can't think of anything that comes to mind right away, but maybe we've had some other things over the years that haven't worked out as well. You could argue, and we've done some shows on different sports, basketball, football, and baseball for sure, but you could even get into some of the other sports like golf and at the high school level say, there probably needs to be some changes in those sports, that could improve the quality of play, that could improve the quality of for the spectator to watch it, right? But again, like you say, the reason change is slow is because there's usually opposition to it. I mean, change scares people.
Well, it does, and go back to a point I made earlier. You have to be a salesperson in leadership. You have to get people to buy in. As Todd Whitaker said, it's people, not programs. You better be able to sell. I remember growing up, one of the dominant players of our lifetime was obviously Shaquille O'Neal. But you think about Shaquille O'Neal, what was the glaring weakness? He couldn't make a free throw, right? So remember this. He was a dominant player, but Shaq could never win an NBA title until he was able to get some closers with him, like when Penny Hardaway played with him, or then obviously ultimately Kobe Bryant. During those championships, Shaquille O'Neal was the best, most dominant player at times, but Kobe was the closer. You know what I mean? Like, you're not
Right.
giving the guy that shoots career 52% from the free throw line the ball at closing time. Like, it's not going to
Right.
work. And I don't know if you remember this, but remember, this is even before our time. Remember Rick Barry, the shot underhand, right? He
Oh
shot the
yeah.
free throws underhand. Like, I think I read one time, don't quote me on this. I think I read one time he missed 9 free throws one year. You know what I mean? Like, it was
Yeah.
a year. Like, he when he retired, he was the best free throw shooter in the history of the game, and he was trying to get Shaq to shoot the old school granny. And Shaq told him, I'd rather shoot 0%. That's not cool.
It's like in Major League when he puts the glasses on for the first time. And like the most important thing is you can see, and Wesley Stein, it's not that important. You know what I mean?
So it's one of those things of where, like, there's such an ego that gets involved, and there's so many different factors that you have to go. It just makes it so difficult.
Well, and
And
not just ego, but like emotion, right? And feelings. Like let me hit you with this one, Shayne. This was an interesting one to me that came up in discussion the other day, and I think this would be good because I'm pretty sure you and I are on a little bit of opposite ends of the spectrum on this, and I didn't hit you with this pre-show, so I'm just going to throw this at you. we've talked a little bit before about transfers, right? At the high school level. Let's face it, with right now at the college level, with the transfer portal, the NIL, players have more control professionally, right? With free agency, that started a long time ago, but you could argue that professionally in college, which is, let's be real honest, major college is sort of at least semi-pro, right? It's kind of a professional organization now. Those players have more control over their situation than ever, right? And I would argue, and this is not a popular stance, but I'm just going to say it, and then you can go after me. But I would argue that the OHSAA would be better off to lessen the restrictions on allowing kids to transfer. And I'll tell you why. Okay. One, I don't believe right now that the OHSAA can properly enforce the transfers. For those that don't know, the OHSAA has like several exceptions, and I can't remember the number. I'm going to say maybe 10 to 12. I mean, I may be off. Exceptions that when a kid changes schools, okay, let's say a sophomore in high school, he changes schools, whether whether he moves, open enrolls, whatever, there's exceptions. If he moves, there's an exception. They can fill out a bona fide legal residence change paper, and if the OHSA approves that, then they're good to go. Sometimes there's other exceptions. There's some that get crazy with like, situations that really don't affect our area that much, like they may in some other cities, but like, but there's exceptions for sometimes if a kid's in a situation that's unsafe at a school. I mean, there's a lot of different things, but the OHSA doesn't really have the manpower available to properly enforce. We see kids all the time. Let's face it, it happens everywhere that kids quote unquote move, right? And they basically rent an apartment. They kind of live there a little bit, but they're really not. And they're driving from their old house, but on paper they live, right? We see that. we see things like that, whether people want to admit it or not, those things happen. Some people do it legitimately. Some people move, I guess my thing is this: why are we telling high school kids, all right, you are destined to play at one particular school for your life because your mom and dad bought a house there when you were 7 years old or whatever. I don't know. You know what I mean? So no matter how bad a shape that program gets in, because let's face it, there are some bad programs, no matter how bad of education that school offers, no matter what the social aspects of your school are, we don't care. You cannot move. You cannot change schools unless you want to give up half your season. You can change, but you got to sit out 11 basketball games in the tournament. You got to sit out 5 football games in the playoffs. Which, let's face it, Shayne, as a player, that would have been devastating. I think we agree on that. If someone would have told you, hey, by the way, you're going to miss your last 11 games in the tournament. And we're telling parents that they cannot do what they think is best for their child in athletic. They can do it in any other walk of life. A parent can do whatever they need for their child's health, safety, for their mental health, whatever they want to do. But when it comes to sports, you cannot, if you move schools, you're going to be punished for it, basically, unless you meet an exception. And to me, you can go right into that school and participate in the band, participate in the drama club, you can go in there and get whatever classes you want to take, get straight A's, but you're going to miss half the season because you didn't meet an exception, let's say. To me, I have a real problem with that. So that those are two of my issues, and I'm gonna let you respond to this. But one, I don't believe the OHSA can force it. I think it's being cheated everywhere. Okay. Two, I think that parents should have the right to do what they think is best for their child. All right. And then three, quite honestly, I think it would lessen the advantage that the private school currently has, because we are never, as much as people would love it, there's never going to be a public private split, unless the only way that's ever going to happen is if private schools leave the athletic association. The OHSA is never, ever in a million years going to make a private school division, because they know if they alienate those private schools, they'll just leave and make their own association. Okay. They're never going to do that. So my point is, if you allowed public schools to have some flexibility, then that would lessen the advantage of the private schools. Now, I'm not talking about in the middle of the season. I'm not talking about third game in, you can change schools. There'll be rules against that. You can't do that. But I'm talking about if a sophomore in high school, over the summer decides they want to go to another school. I don't know. Because I feel like I've been on both sides of this, Shayne. I've been hurt by kids leaving. Okay. We were fortunate in Benton County. We didn't have a lot of kids leave, and we didn't get a lot of kids in. Okay. We were down there kind of by ourselves. And I was hurt a couple times by kids leaving. And I think in 23 years, I had 3 players that moved or transferred into our program that actually contributed greatly to our program. So 3 in 23. I mean, and that was because, if you didn't live there, you're going to drive a while to get there. Okay. So I've seen a little bit of both sides. And I guess my point is, for some of the schools that struggle athletically, they may get a kid sometimes to come into that school who otherwise wouldn't, because their parents aren't going to move there and buy a house in that district or whatever. And I think too, to me, I think it's okay if a kid can't play in a certain school, because that school's really, really good at a sport and he just can't make the team or whatever. Should that kid just be destined to never play that sport again? You know what I mean? Like, hey, I got cut from the volleyball team at my school, so my choices are I just can't play volleyball ever. To me, I don't know. I mean, I guess I just feel like parents should have some flexibility. So I'll throw that at you, let you respond, because I'm pretty sure you're on a little bit of an opposite part of this with me, and I'm interested to hear your take on it.
Well, I am. I'm not a big fan. I can't. I was really trying to listen to your points carefully there, and I was even jotting down some notes here in terms of
I know I threw a lot of different points at you too. I get it. Yeah.
I can't argue. I can't argue the difficulty in enforcement. I can't argue the public-private school debate. I mean, look, some of my best situations as a coach ended in some of those situations you're talking about. The one joke we always talked about when the brackets come out is you hope if you're lucky enough to get to the regional, you're not playing a team that starts with Shayne or ends in Catholic, right? It's one of those where you understand when you're playing a Newark Catholic, or you understand when you're running into those types of programs or schools, the advantage that they have. There's no doubt about it. I can't argue with those things. I think no matter what our strong beliefs are, it kind of goes back to the type of personality I have. I also have some people that I know really, really well that they're movers. You know what I mean? Like they're mobile. You know, they're not going to stay in the same type of job more than 3, 4, 5 years at a time. You know, they may, if they're involved in sports, you'll see some people play 2 or 3 high schools in 4 years. You'll see some people they'll play for a different AAU team every summer. It's they're changing. I think almost more important than my stance on transferring or sitting here on my soapbox and saying I don't like transferring. I think the thing with leadership that I would tell people is this, and here's what my experience has taught me, is you have to put your ego aside and you have to understand, why do you do this? So like, there's going to be times you invest in people. There's going to be times you absolutely go all in with people. You're going to give them your all. You're going to put your trust in them. You're going to give them the keys of the car, so to speak. Maybe it's in a particular, um, you know, assistant role, or it could be an athlete in a program, or it could be any position in a particular organization, and they're going to leave, right? If you go back to show 42, we had some great feedback last week. We're talking about getting and keeping great people, and why do people leave? Sometimes it's things out of your control. So sometimes you're going to do everything right and you're going to invest all in on people, and at the end of the day, you're going to wake up one day and they're just going to leave. And when that happens, you have a couple ways you can respond to that. There's going to be a little bit of a personal hit. You're always going to look in the mirror. What could I have done differently? But at the end of the day, it's kind of one of those things. You have to accept it and you have to move on, because guess what? Like, they're not going to shut down your organization. You know what I mean? Like, it's one of those
Right.
things that if so and so left on Monday, I assume you have to be at work on Tuesday, right? So like when you walk into that on Tuesday, there's still a bunch of people looking to you to see how you're going to react. There's a bunch of people looking at you to see how you're going to move forward, and still be there for the people. So it kind of goes back to that. After a while, Matt, you can't worry about who you are not. You have to worry about who you are and how are you going to move forward. So like when I'm listening to all those factors, I try, as in all things, I try to be very, very open-minded. I can't argue with your points about the OHSAA. I'm not a parent, so I can't sit here and comment in terms of, I think in my personal experience, I was very fortunate because I was almost blinded to bad situations. I grew up in a situation where I loved my coaches. I loved my programs when I played. You know what I mean? Like I never even crossed my mind not to want to play for them, or to be a part of them. Even to this day, even though I'm not associated with the school I graduated from, I'll forever be linked to those particular programs and coaches that still to this day. I see those I ran into our high school basketball coach in Kroger's the other day, talked to him for a good while. I see my golf coach all the time, talk to him for a while. You know what I mean? It's one of those things will forever be linked. But you're right. Maybe if people are having a bad experience, or maybe if people having they do want those things. I guess all I would say to people is this: is make those decisions for the right reason. Are you leaving for a better situation? Are you running away from something? Are you running away from a challenge? Are you looking to make things easier? There's a lot of different things, and only you can answer those things. But I guess for me as an adult now, I would say to the leaders, based on show 42 last week, and in the probably the 3 or 4 pieces of feedback I got that I really enjoyed, is I remind myself of, you don't have time to take it personally if
Mhm.
someone leaves you. You've got to be able to move forward, and you've got to be able to go to work and do the very, very best you can moving forward to still lead those people that are looking to you for leadership. Does that make sense?
Oh no, it definitely does. And I think my thing is, I'm looking at it. I guess I'm looking at it also from, if I were a rule maker, I guess. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what I think would be best for everybody involved, because I think the one thing, Shayne, and I guess this comes down to change too, is emotions affect decisions too, right? I think sometimes, do you think it's important when you're looking at, like, say you're in a leadership position where you're asked to come up with a change of something? I almost feel like you have to take emotion out of it a little bit. That's hard to do, because I think, like, with this whole thing I just brought up with the OHSA, I mean, here's my deal. I'm like you. I grew up in a great situation, which I would have never in a million years wanted to change schools. I loved my school. Okay. I loved my coaches, loved the situation I was in. I went to a school and worked for 2.5 decades where there's a lot of school pride. You know what I mean? And kids grow up in that county, they become parents, and those kids grew up in that county. And before you know it, generations of people have grown up in that county. Okay. And they have a lot of pride in their school. So they're not looking, what I mean? There's not a whole lot of transferring out and all that. I know the school you work at. I've said it a million times. I have a lot of respect for the family atmosphere that Paint Valley creates, and they care about each other. And I'm sure you've lost a few over the years, but not very many. I mean, there's a lot more that stay than go, because they really, when they're a Bearcat, they're a Bearcat. And I know a lot of people that are, Paint Valley through and through, right? So I guess my point is, Shayne, we've, sometimes when we're making changes, if we're not careful, we're basing our approach on our own experiences and our own emotions. That's my whole thing. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So when I've thought about this transfer thing, I've tried to separate myself a little bit from it. Like, what if I would have been a kid, a football player, and there was only 19 kids on my football team, and I was a running back, and I was getting my brains beaten every night? And it almost was a safety issue, right? And what if my coach was verbally abusive, but nobody did anything about it? What if my coach was just terrible and he just didn't care, and the program was a joke? What if, I just felt like socially and academically it wasn't, I guess I'm trying to think. I'm trying not to base it only on my own personal experiences or my own personal emotions, because I'm like you. I would rather see kids play at the school they grew up in, right? And hey, when I get older, we're going to be good. We're going to, you know how it is. Like when we were in the fourth, fifth grade, sixth grade, right? We're watching these teams. Hey, when we get up there, we're going to do this, and that's what high school sports is all about, and that's what I love. But I guess what I'm saying is, when you're making decisions as a leader, can you base those decisions on best case scenario? I mean, that's my thing too. And I think sometimes we have to take emotion out of it a little bit. Do you think, and we can get off the OHSA thing if you want, or you come back to it, but like, do you think sometimes if we're not careful as leaders, we only see things through the lens of what we've experienced or what our emotions tell us? I remember this is a serious topic, so I don't want to make light of this, but I remember speaking to somebody one time and they told me, I don't understand how people become addicted to pain medication. That's what they tell me. And I'm like, and this guy told me I had to take all kinds of pain medication when I had this, and this, and I never become addicted. And I thought to myself, like, that's the most closed-minded thing I've ever heard in my life. So you were fortunate enough not to have it happen to you, so you don't see how it happens to anybody else. You understand what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And that's very serious, and we're talking sports here, right? So let's not compare the two. But I guess what I'm saying is, as a leader, do we have to separate ourselves sometimes when we make decisions on, because you see it, you deal with a kid at school, right, who's got discipline issues. He didn't grow up in the same home you grew up in. He didn't have the same mom and dad that you and I had. You know what I mean? So how do we deal with that kid if we're only looking at something through our lens? You see where I'm coming with
Well,
that?
sure. I think you have to have, again, it's multiple perspective. I was just telling someone today, if I'd had the option at 14, 15, 16 years old to turn over and turn the alarm clock off, I'm not sure I would have got up and went to school every
That's
day.
what I
Now,
mean.
I think I would have went to school, but do you think I'd have come in third period several days a week? Sure. Yeah, I mean, like it, but that wasn't an option. I mean, like,
I tell people all the time, I was a little on the ornery side as it was, and I had great parents. If I had
yeah.
bad parents, I don't know what would happen to me. I'm
So
just gonna be
I,
straight with
I guess the closest thing for me would be to think of the 13 years I did the SVCSportZone.com, right? And I'm still doing the SVC Sports Zone past the website on the John Bruce, and I'm still doing a lot of this stuff, and we'll cover the league in various ways. I work for SVC Network now and write for Great Seal Sports, still just covering kids in a different way. But in wearing that hat, Matt, I guess the closest experience in terms of what you're saying would be in all of this SVC expansion talk. So people that are listening outside of our area, our side of Valley Conference, we have a huge discrepancy in enrollment. We go from Division II schools all the way down to Division IV schools. So what's happened in the last decade, and it's kind of died off now a little bit, but about a decade ago, there was a real hot topic of expansion where we're going to need to break up. And I feel like in leadership, I got asked that question a lot in different things, and I feel like I always was able to view the perspective of me being in a small school at Paint Valley, but me having a great love for the side of Valley Conference. Again, I played in the league, I've coached in the league, I've covered the league. I mean, I'm 5 years old, and the SVC's been a pretty strong part of my life for 30 years now. So like
you.
35 years now. So if I would never want to see the side of Valley. So maybe I'm old school, right? Maybe I'm traditionalist, maybe whatever. But like I have a great love, and there's a lot of things that I see in our league that other leagues, wish they had.
Mhm.
And I think we're a great league. So if I'm wearing the hat as a league leader, I'm probably going to say I don't want to lead the Senate. Now, I'd be lying to you if I didn't have times in the last 10, 15, 20 years as a Paint Valley hat looking and saying, dang on, man, if we'd have moved into this conference and we'd have played baseball in that conference for the last 20 years, where would we be? If we'd have played volleyball in some of these other conferences for the last 20 years? Would people look at Paint Valley volleyball differently? You know what I'm saying? So
Right.
it's one of those things where it's 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 that different perspective in terms of how you go. So I think sometimes when I'm listening to you talk about the OHSA, because I want to circle back to that, I say that to say this is I don't know all the answers, but what I do know in my leadership perspective, as someone who has taught and been right in the heart and soul of middle school for the last 20 years, I can tell you this, that if you have a son or daughter that's very, very passionate about something, I'm not just talking about sports, I'm talking about anything, at a small school setting, and you are a parent and they are a kid who's interested in being a part of something bigger than themselves, they have a big time, massive control over the success that that particular grade and the grades around them are going to have at that particular thing. So if I'm just using, you know, basketball as an example, or football as an example, or the band as an example, whatever it is, if you have, some parents and you have a kid or two and they're at a young age, sixth grade, seventh grade, eighth grade, ninth grade, they're all in and and they become an ambassador for that. I don't know if that's true at the Division II level. I don't know if that's
Mhm.
true at the Division I. I don't know if you could walk into Chillicothe High School or to Uniota High School or to Benton County High School because I've never worked at a school that big.
Right.
All I know is at a small school like Paint Valley, I guarantee it. I almost guarantee it that you can make it as successful as you want to make it because you
Mhm.
have that much control over the culture and over people's perception of it. Does that make sense? So, like, I think
Oh
what you're
yeah.
saying is that perspective that I have. Sometimes I do the very best I can to step out of my comfort zone and think, okay, in leadership, what would be the best for this group or this group or this group? But then there's sometimes where when you work the everyday battle or the everyday environment, sure, you're gonna look at it through your own environment. So I think when people are voting on these OHSA things or people are voting on these league things, they're looking at it as how is this going to influence me? And
Mhm.
I think that's a tricky dynamic when you start to think about. I know how hard it is to get 8 principals or 8 ADs on the same page in our one little conference. Imagine UHSA trying to do it statewide with Division I schools and in football all the way down to what Division 7. In terms of discrepancy.
Right. Yeah. 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 It's interesting what you say there because there is so much perspective involved. And, I think, and I didn't want to come across when I talked about that as the only kids that wanted change were in bad situations. A lot of times, sometimes kids are in such a good school, such a talented school that they just can't, like we ran into a situation several years ago where we had a run of teams. We had a group come through that was one of our best groups in the history of our school. And at one point, won 35 straight league games or whatever. And it was just that type of group. So there wasn't a lot of like for a kid coming up trying to play, right? There wasn't a lot of place for him to kind of stick his nose in and get in there. And I can remember one kid decided to transfer his senior year. And he came to me and he said, "Hey, I hope there's no hard feelings. I'm not leaving because I'm mad. I'm leaving because I'm not good enough to play here." You know what I mean? He just told me that. He goes, "I can go down the road to this school and play, start some, play a lot." And he'd been in our program. He had tried, you know what I mean? He wasn't gonna get to play, and he wanted to play. And I had no problem with that. I told him, I said, "Hey, look, appreciate the honesty. Anything I can do to help you." I feel like kids should have that option, So sometimes it's the good, not just the bad situation.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're talking about, like it's not just somebody being disgruntled, because you're right, like you said. And I think no matter what the size of your school, what you just said is true to an extent. If you want to create a positive thing, when kids are young and you get the right groups of kids together and you do it right, you teach the game correctly. And I know we're going to talk, I think in our next episode, we're going to talk a little bit about youth
Mm-hmm.
sports and practice versus plays and things like that. And then you do it right at those younger levels, you've seen it at Payne Valley you've had some really good people in your youth baseball programs over the years. You've done some, those guys have done some amazing things with that youth baseball program out there, right? And that's benefited you. And you've had great people doing great things. So no, but the one thing I want to hit you with that you said was really interesting to me. I know we're running a little bit long, but I think this is
That's
really
fine.
important.
This
You
has
said,
been some of our best conversations.
yeah, you brought up an interesting point of, if you're going to be in a leadership position, you have to examine things through different lenses. Like you said it yourself, what about the league expansion? You looked at it from a small school coach, but you also stepped back and looked at it from a league wide perspective, right? That's so important. Don't you think, if you're put in a position where you need to create change, is you need to look at it from different perspectives, and that might mean talking to some different people, getting different ideas, right? um, you know Even within your own staff, a principal may see things different than a teacher, right? A teacher may see things different than the custodian, the cook, the bus driver. I mean, there's all different parts of this that have to go together. And I think it's interesting what you said, and I think it shows good leadership on your part. But I think that we I don't want it to be missed that it's so important to examine it from different perspectives and not just your own.
You know, and I'll even lead into some closing remarks here if you
Right.
want me to here, and if you
Yeah.
have something new in your go, but for some reason this came to my mind there as we were talking about this earlier. I had a coach one time. It was actually a small college coach, and it escapes me where it was. It was one of the Ohio schools. It might have even been the coach that followed Hunter at Wittenberg. The name escapes
Bill
me, so
Brown.
maybe you can.
Bill
Okay,
Bill Brown,
from
maybe.
OU, right?
I think it's Bill Brown. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
and he was talking about how the world's either coming to you or the world's going away from you, and that was his message to coaches and to players when he was talking at camp one year, and and what he meant by that, and you were talking earlier about great leaders that were like, hey, I'm not doing this computer thing, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
In a way, the world was going away from them, right? It was here's how I do it, but the world is going to computer. It's going to email. Now all of a sudden it's not just good enough to do it on the computer, but it's on the Google Doc, right? So that
Right.
and it's just constant. And if we teach 10, 15, 20 more years, there's going to be something else that we're going to have to
Oh,
adjust to again. I know
a
how
bunch
hard
of
it was
something
for me to
else's.
go from
Yeah.
Microsoft Word to the Google Doc, and and you adjust and you adjust and you adjust. I guess I think about it in the sports world. I started thinking about, because I love sports, so I always make sports analogy. But like I think back to our childhood, and they're talking about how much they shoot the 3-point shot now, right? Like didn't Reggie Miller kind of come along one generation too early? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like would he not be? He was a Hall of Famer, but wouldn't he be viewed even differently in today's game? Or
Sure.
like, or I don't want to go too many examples, but like a Zeke Elliott or a Henry, the running back or whatever, wouldn't
Right.
they have been better off coming a generation earlier, where it was
Right.
a one running back, here's the ball 40 times a game, go make your money? And but at the same time, as a leader in today's time, if you coach Vince Coleman in his prime, does that mean he'd only steal 20 bases?
Yeah.
Yeah, you know what I mean? So it's as a leader and as a coach and people who kind of follow sports, maybe I'm not using good enough examples there for everybody to follow, but for our sports people, the I think they'll understand the point I'm making is, don't you have to adjust to the way the world is going? Don't you have to adjust in terms of, you know, as he said, the world's either coming to you or going away from you. Well, the more versatile you are and the more open-minded you are, the world never gets away from you. That's how you stay up in terms of leadership. How do I relate to the most people? I stay up and I have the world coming to me. Does that make sense? That's kind of the
Yeah.
closing thought that comes to my mind that constantly makes me think of. I love the word you used earlier about emotion, and how sometimes, man, when you get subjective and you let emotion and you let personal beliefs come in, you know what I mean? So, like when it comes to transferring, or if it comes to school rivals, or if it comes to, the way you feel about certain things, or how it's going to affect your school, or how it's going to affect your kid, or how it's going to, that's when you're in a danger situation as a leader, because you're probably not making decisions in the right frame of mind for the majority of the people that you're supposed to be leading. Is that kind of a good summary of the show in your opinion?
Yeah, it really is. I think just to kind of play off that for my closing thought, it would be this, I think you have to have your core set of beliefs or values or whatever you want to call them, right? You got to have, kind of what you believe in, but you have to have the flexibility to execute the plan, whatever the plan is, in a different way, because it's always changing, right? I mean, if I said to you, Shayne, in all honesty, do you believe that much differently about how a player should act, how a coach should act, how a team should behave, what team chemistry should look like? Do you believe that much differently in what a teaching staff should look like and what approach in the classroom should be than you did when you first started 2 decades ago? My guess is probably not that much, right? You have your core set of beliefs and values, but
right.
If I said to you, do you believe that you've learned different approaches over the years to getting there? I'm guessing you'd probably say, yeah, there's been different things. And you've been open-minded to those approaches. I think that's the whole key, right? It's like, this is what I believe in. And I'm willing to listen to your opinion, but I'm pretty set that, these are my convictions. But we might be able to get there in some different ways, right? We might be able to, I believe that, that there needs to be boundaries between, let's say, coach and parent, right? But I also believe that we can figure out different ways to communicate better to make sure we're on the same page and still have those boundaries. I guess that maybe, I don't know if that's the best thing, but I think that's the whole thing we're talking about here when we're talking about change. The willingness to be flexible in terms of the execution, not so much the core set of values or beliefs.
Yeah, I think that's good stuff. I think it's been a great show. I'm anxious to get some of the feedback again throughout Facebook and Twitter. You can find us there, SVC Sports Zone. Let us know what you're thinking. I really enjoyed the feedback from last week's show 42 in terms of getting and keeping great people. Matt, this has been a lot of fun. We talked tradition, and I think being aware of change, being accepting of change, like you said, having those core values and those non-negotiables that even though they might take on a little terminology or different things. I agree with what you're saying there in your closing, that a lot of those core things are the foundation pieces. And I think that's good stuff. So on that note, Matt, I think we've covered it. I think it's a really good show. Next week, as you said, we're going to get together and we're going to talk a little bit more at the little league level. Game versus practice, development versus competition and some of those things. But on that note, I think I'll close this out here. Show 43 of Expanding the Zone. Again, thank you to Dr. Chris Good Health Chiropractic Center, for all the support here on the YouTube channel. If you're out there listening to us on the podcast, check us out on YouTube. And the other way around, if you're watching us on YouTube and you want to get us in your car or as you're traveling or at work there at the desk or whatever, you can get us just about wherever you get your podcast app. So Matt, on that note, we're going to get on out of here. Show 43, Expanding the Zone. We'll be back next week, talk a little league development versus competition. Thanks, everyone.
Now it's time for change. Nothing stays the same. Now it's time for change.